Alright, hello everybody and welcome back one and all to the Deathworlders by Philip Hambone Johnson. I am, as always, Hungry Werewolf, and once again I'm going to be kicking this off like this. The Deathworlders is copyright Philip Richard Johnson, aka Hambone, Hambone 3110 and Hambone FHFY. Some rights are reserved. The copyright holder reserves all commercial rights and ownerships of this intellectual property. Permission is given for other parties to share, redistribute, and copy this work under a Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial Share-alike 4.0 international license. All song lyrics, movie titles, or other copyrighted material and trademarks that are referenced in this work under fair use are the property of their respective owners. This work contains deliberate mentions of real persons, places, and trademarks which are made purely for reasons of verisimilitude under nominative fair use. These mentions have not been endorsed or sponsored by those persons or by the owners or governing bodies of those trademarks or places. Otherwise, the events and characters portrayed in this story are fictional, and any resemblance to actual persons or events is accidental. The author does not automatically share or endorse the opinions and behavior of his characters. Of the characters. Okay. Sorry, if I seem a little bit winded. Had a nice little gym session before this. A little bit dehydrated. But yes, I'm starting every video like that just to make sure nobody calls me on copyright. And again, everything will be posted in the About section. Main thing is, sorry about all the breathing noises that got in the last one. I didn't realize it was coming through that badly. I'm hoping it's going to be a little bit better this time. I'm sitting a bit further away from my mic, but we'll see. So today we continue on with Chapter 0, the Kevin Jenkins experience. I keep almost saying experiment. I don't know why. But Chapter 0.2, the Kevin Jenkins experience. I found the human Kevin Jenkins in conversation with one of the station's senior lawyers on the public promenade deck. I had been retired from the customs and immigration desk on the docking ring while my injuries were repaired, and instead had spent much of the last 3 groups of 8 standard dirennials dealing with the paperwork and investigative work that had followed the Hunter attack. I had seen him only twice since, once when I saw him on the news feed as the galactic media briefly turned their attention to our station and its unusual story, and the second time was when I took his statement for the official incident report. On the news, his eye had still been swollen and ugly, much of his flesh had darkened and bruised from the minor hemorrhaging, and he had been wincing with pain every time he drew a breath. When I interviewed him, the swelling had gone down and the pain in his breath had gone away. Now, 20 diurnals after the attack, there was just some greenish discoloration to show that he had ever been injured. My arm, meanwhile, had needed amputating, and I was still adjusting to the plastic and carbon fiber prosthetic that had replaced it. He raised a forelimb and waggled his hand at me as I approached, and our social cybernetics agreed that this was a gesture of greeting. "Kirk!" he exclaimed. He was completely unable to pronounce my name, so had taken to approximating the first syllable with my permission. He was still yet to explain why he had found it so amusing to call me that. A chair reconfigured itself for my anatomy, and I straddled it. Jenkins received no such luxury from the chairs, but seemed comfortable enough anyway. I hope I'm not interrupting, Lawyer Vidregnug, I asked. "You are not, Officer Acton," Vidreg replied. He and I were good acquaintances, but his species are sticklers for observing some formalities upon greeting one another. Purveyor Jenkins and I were discussing his petition to have his species reclassified as sentient. "Purveyor Jenkins?" I asked. "Back on Earth, I owned a recreational establishment," the human said, sipping his glass of water. I had noticed that his water intake was surprisingly high considering his size, and made a note to ask him about it. I assumed you were military," I told him. He chuckled. Nope. But you were fearless when those hunters were shooting you. Exclaimed. He did that complicated joint lift with his forelimbs again. A shrug. How's your arm? He asked, changing the subject. I'm adapting to it, thank you. So you think you may be able to have humans reclassified? A wave of purple pigmentation rippled down Vedrek's flank. Pessimism. It would require an amendment to the Galactic Treaty of Laws, he said, which the Council is historically stubborn to tamper with. Amending the treaty tends to lose votes. Jenkins issued a coarse sound through his nasal orifice, derision, but said nothing. He rolled up the sleeves of fabric that covered his forelimbs until they were bunched around the mid-joint. I noticed that a patch of skin on his left arm had been artificially pigmented. It was a simple design, one long line crossed by a shorter one. His skin went bumpy and raised his sparse body fur. His social implant reported no emotional context for that, so I assumed his automatic response to some environmental factor. Aliens can be surprisingly strange at the best of times, but I was beginning to suspect that humans may be weirder than most. The medical report from the team that provided care to Jenkins after the battle said his bloodstream contained a powerful combat drug, though I was certain he hadn't ingested, inhaled, or injected any during the fight. There hadn't been time. Muscles shifted under his thin brown skin as he tapped his digits on the tabletop in a simple 1-2-3 rhythm. In any other species, the movement would have looked obscenely organic. Fascinating biology, Vendred agreed with me, and I indicated embarrassment. Clearly I had been displaying my fascination openly enough for my social implant to broadcast it. How strong are you, Purveyor Jenkins? Jenkins shrugged. Strong enough to rip the leg off a hunter? Beat another hunter to death with it? He said. I don't know how that translates. I meant by the standard of your own species, Vedret clarified. Jenkins thought about it. I don't know. I try to stay in shape, but between the low gravity, not getting enough food, I've probably lost some muscle. About or slightly below average for a male of my size, he suggested. Vedret and I exchanged a glance that bypassed the social implants. There are going to be a lot of nervous species out there when your kind develop quantum communication, Vedret opened. You have no idea, Jenkins muttered. The twin patches of fur above his eyes creased inwards and downwards. My translator informed me that this emotion had no equivalent in my species. Unarmed, you single-handedly defeated 3 of the most feared aliens in known space, and you tell us you are neither a trained warrior nor a physically exceptional specimen of your kind. The security footage records you being shot 7 times by heavy pulse gun fire, and you have fully healed in less than 3 times 8 dineros. I said, many officers have suggested to me that you are a security threat, on the grounds that if you decided to go on a violent rampage, there'd be little that could stop you. You have those nerve jam grenade things, he pointed out. Those are lethal, I replied. But they'd work. I mean, they gave me a splitting headache from across the room. I filed this away as a rebuttal for the next officer to approach me on the subject. At that distance, the nerve jam grenade should not have affected him at all. Heightened sensitivity? Then I realized I was treating this man who had saved my life as if he was a threat that I needed to figure out how to kill and suppress the flash of shame. I'm surprised, actually, Jenkins confessed. What by? Vedreg asked. By how easily they broke. I knew I was stronger and tougher than most sentient life, but I had no idea the difference was that big. It's intimidating. I feel like Superman. Superman? Fiction. From my homeworld, a human who could fly without wings and who was impossibly strong but utterly impervious to all attempts to harm him. And he used his power to save the world and protect the weak. Well, except he wasn't really a human. He was an alien who looked exactly like a human whose parents sent him to Earth because their own planet was about to be destroyed. He paused. Complicated. Every species has fiction, I pointed out. Your Superman sounds like Tivin Tricketix, who defended his tribe from a pack of predators for a year without sleeping. Or Gudrov Gnagd, who grew so large that his tribe could shelter behind him from the year storm, said Verdrag. Though I find it interesting that your greatest hero was not even of your own species. We've always thought of ourselves as weak, Jenkins said. I couldn't restrain my strangled bleat of disbelief. Well, by the standards of a lot of species on Earth, we are weak. Horses can carry more, dogs can bite harder and scent better. Most prey species worth hunting could crush an incautious hunter if they turned to fight. And any of the apex predators will happily eat a human. Our closest evolutionary cousins are much stronger than us. We just happen to be the ones who figured out brain power, tool use, and teamwork to overcome those challenges. He scratched his tattoo. And we have other weaknesses. What is that? Verdrag asked. I couldn't tell if he had failed to notice the human's discomfort or if he simply didn't care. Something I've never seen since I first started wandering around all these stations, Jenkins said. Tell me, did either of your species ever have something called religion? We gave it a moment's thought. My implant can't find an equivalent concept, Verdrag told him. I gestured that this was true for me also. What is it? Our greatest weakness, Jenkins said, and the reason you guys are going to shit yourselves when humans finally get off the ground. We listened, and I privately felt a sense of alarm mounting within me. The concept was very, very alien. Humans, it seemed, had for the most of their sentient era preferred to invent explanations for the world around them rather than to admit a lack of knowledge. They had invented a sentience that was capable of doing any logically consistent thing, capable of knowing anything. Rather than answer the mystery of where they had come from, they had historically preferred to tell stories and then convince themselves that stories were true. If Jenkins was to be believed, then the line between fantasy and reality was, for many humans, invisible. He told us of the myth he had grown up being told was real, how this great power, God, had made the universe in a handful of Durnells, and crafted the first humans from the dirt of their homeworld. They had disobeyed him and been punished, and as had their descendants and their descendants, until apparently one tribe had tortured this being's physical avatar to death. He gestured to the tattoo at this point, explaining that it depicted a crucifix, the very instrument of torture in question. This act somehow convinced this God thing to forgive them and be nice to humanity, as long as they devoted considerable time and effort to telling it how great it was. Verdrag had turned a grim shade of worried dark green by the time Jenkins finished telling the story. So, this God created humans, got angry at them, condemned them to be tortured forever and ever after death, and then had it self-sacrifice to itself to save mankind from the very torture it was inflicting upon them? Yes. Yes. My social implant tentatively suggests that Jenkins' body language communicated tired endurance. And humans believe that this is the real way in which the history of your species unfolded. About a third of us still do, yes. We were silent for some time, but Verdrag slowly went bluer and bluer until suddenly he erupted. Why? He demanded. I don't know, Jenkins responded calmly. You don't know? You're wearing the symbol of this masochism on your arm, and you don't know why your people believe it? I know why I believed it, Jenkins said. I didn't know any better. But, Jenkins interrupted, his implant radiating whining patience and mounting embarrassment. I was taught this thing from a very young age, as if it was true. I had no reason to believe I was being lied to, so I accepted it. Took me half my life to realize that the people who taught me this thing didn't have to be lying, they could just be wrong. He swallowed the last of his glass of water. When I told my family that I stopped believing that the God myth was true, they accused me of being evil and severed all contact with me. I had to go to civilian law enforcement before most of my property was returned. I was actually driving back from talking with my lawyer about fighting for the right to have contact with my own offspring when I was abducted. He looked me in the eye. You have to understand. I come from one of the more civilized parts of my planet. Vidreg and I sat in silence for several minutes, absorbing the news. Jenkins, if anything, seemed grateful for the silence. That is deeply troubling information, Purveyor Jenkins, Vidreg said eventually. It implies that your entire species is insane. I don't disagree, Jenkins replied. You are strong, fast, impervious to pulse fire. Not impervious, just highly resilient, I corrected. Vidreg ignored the correction and forged ahead. Have a gland that generates combat drugs? I looked at Jenkins, surprised. He did that shrug thing again, this time wobbling his head apologetically. Vidreg kept going, apparently oblivious to the exchange. And now you tell me that your species is gripped by the fervent belief that a tale of breathtaking violence and cruelty is all true, and that many of you are willing to die in service to the principal villain of this story. I'm willing to have a hard time convincing anybody that your people should be declared sentient as long as this state of affairs continues. Let me tell you why you need to try, Jenkins said quietly. Why? The human gave a worried smile. 'Cause if you don't, you won't be ready for us, he said.